Have you ever just wondered what exactly happens after we die? I mean, it's pretty much the ultimate human question, right? It sparked thousands of myths, legends, and massive philosophical debates throughout history. Well, today in this explainer, we're going to look at how one specific 13th century thinker tackled this mystery. We're talking about St. Thomas Aquinas. But here's the really wild part. Aquinas didn't treat the afterlife like some mystic staring into a crystal ball. Not at all. He approached it more like an architect drafting this incredibly precise, almost mathematical blueprint of the invisible world. He basically took the terrifying, chaotic unknown of death and tried to map it out with literally staggering logical rigor. To get a sense of just how deep his logic actually goes, think about this bizarre paradox right out of his text. Can a non-physical ghost, like a spirit with zero physical body and no nerve endings, actually feel the heat of a real material fire? Sounds like a total riddle, right? But for Aquinas, there was no joke here. This was a serious mechanical glitch in his system that demanded a rational fix. Now, we're not here to debate theology today. We're just here to objectively marvel at the sheer architectural ambition of his mind as we decode his monumental work, the Summa Theologica. Okay, let's dive right into this. Our tour is going to be broken down into three main sections. First, we'll map the medieval afterlife. Second, we'll look at the physics of a spirit. And finally, we'll explore the economy of prayers. Let's start with section 1, mapping the medieval afterlife and the 5 abodes of souls. You know, when most of us think about the afterlife, we usually just picture heaven and hell, right? Just 2 options. But Aquinas, drawing on centuries of tradition, categorized souls with absolute extreme precision based on their exact state of grace. Notice how there aren't just 2 destinations here. There are 5 distinct abodes. Heaven is the eternal realm of supreme joy and the direct vision of God. Hell of the damned is the exact opposite, eternal, full of sensible punishment, and totally without God. But then, right in the middle, we have purgatory, which is a temporary state of temporal punishment where souls are basically cleansed. And finally, look at this. We have not 1 but 2 limbos, the limbo of the fathers and the limbo of children. Now, having 2 completely different limbos in this framework naturally makes you wonder, are all limbos created equal? Like, why did Aquinas feel the need to split them up, and what exactly makes them different in his giant architectural system? Now, what's really interesting here is Aquinas' super strict adherence to logic when it comes to a personal defect versus a defect of human nature itself. The limbo of the fathers, that was basically a temporary holding cell. These were the righteous folks who lived before Christ. They had faith and grace, so they were full of hope, essentially just waiting for the gates of heaven to finally open. But the limbo of children was totally different. It was for those who died with original sin, but 0 actual personal sins. Because they didn't have personal guilt, Aquinas reasoned it'd be completely unjust for them to suffer any sensible pain or physical torture. But because they lacked grace, they still couldn't attain that heavenly vision. So their state becomes eternal. They don't have the hope of heavenly glory, but they are entirely free from the physical torments of hell. It's this incredibly fascinating, highly categorized compromise of medieval justice. Moving right along to section 2, the physics of a spirit and the rules of the incorporeal. So when a soul actually leaves the physical body, what is it? Like, how does it even function? Aquinas tackles this by defining what he calls sensitive powers. We're talking about faculties like physical sight, hearing, and imagination. According to his logic, you need actual bodily organs for those to work. I mean, you can't see without eyes, you can't hear without ears, right? Therefore, these sensitive powers literally cannot remain active in a separated soul. Think of it like this, and this is a great modern metaphor. A separated soul without a body is basically like software without hardware. It keeps its core code, its intellect, and its will, but it completely loses its physical interface with the world. So it can think and it can choose, but it absolutely cannot touch or feel in a physical sense. Which brings us right back to our opening hook. If a soul has no physical senses, no hardware to feel anything with at all, how on earth can the material fires of hell or purgatory actually cause it suffering? This right here is where we see the immense, almost staggering philosophical gymnastics Aquinas had to pull off to solve what looks like an impossible contradiction. Let's trace how he builds this into a brilliant, step-by-step logical solution. Aquinas argues that physical fire punishes a spiritual entity not by burning it, but by trapping it. Step 1. the material fire is elevated to act as an instrument of divine justice. Step 2, this fire binds the immaterial spirit to a very specific physical location. It essentially acts as a prison. Now, a spirit naturally wants to move freely wherever its intellect and will want to go, but step 3, the fire forcefully restricts that natural movement. It ties the soul down completely against its will. And it's exactly this agonizing restriction, binding a free spirit to a fixed physical element, that causes the soul profound, real distress. It doesn't feel the heat, it feels the chains. And Aquinas actually supports this mechanism by citing the Book of Wisdom, saying, "The corruptible body is a load upon the soul." He explains that just as our heavy physical bodies weigh down our living spirits right now in this life, the material fire of the afterlife acts as an anchor. It detains the dead spirit entirely against its will. It's a psychological and spiritual torment of confinement engineered with absolutely perfect logical consistency. All right, on to section 3, the economy of prayers and connecting the realms. So in Aquinas' blueprint, the living and the dead aren't just sitting in totally isolated bubbles. They actually share this interconnected, highly structured spiritual economy. And right at the heart of this economy is the concept of suffrages. Basically, suffrages are works of merit performed by the living, stuff like prayers, giving alms to the poor, and sacrifices, that can remit or essentially pay off the temporal punishment of the dead. Think of suffrages as the official currency used by the living to transact with the afterlife. It's a surprisingly objective, almost mathematical system of debt and payment. So how exactly are these funds transferred? Well, Aquinas lists some very specific methods. The absolute most powerful is the sacrifice of the altar, better known as the Mass. But the list also includes almsgiving, the prayers of the saints, and the fasting of kinsfolk. If you fast or give to charity with the specific intention of helping a deceased loved one, you're effectively wiring spiritual funds directly to their account to help pay off their remaining temporal debts. But what if the person wiring those funds is, well, a bad person? What if a known sinner performs the prayer? So the crucial point here is how Aquinas breaks down the literal mess of a suffrage. He splits it into 2 parts. First, you have the action done. This is the objective, built-in value of the ritual itself. Second, the action of the agent, which is the personal merit and charity of the person actually doing it. This means even if a priest is in a state of sin, the action done, like the Mass, completely retains its objective value because the priest is just acting as an instrument of the church. The spiritual currency holds its value, regardless of the personal flaws of the bank teller, so to speak. It's an incredibly robust system, you have to admit. But it totally begs the question, does this spiritual currency work everywhere in the afterlife? Can you use these suffrages as a universal skeleton key to unlock the gates of any of those 5 abodes we mapped out earlier? Well, the data brilliantly illustrates the strict boundaries of Aquinas' economy. The efficacy of suffrages applies 100% exclusively to purgatory. Notice how the value just plummets to absolute 0 everywhere else. Why is that? Well, because the damned in hell are completely cut off from grace. They literally can't receive it. The children in limbo can't change their eternal state. And the saints in heaven, they're already perfectly fulfilled. They require nothing from us. The entire economy of suffrages is laser-focused solely on aiding those temporary residents stuck in purgatory. But what actually powers this whole vast, invisible network? Aquinas writes, charity, which is the bond uniting the members of the church, extends not only to the living, but also to the dead who die in charity. This entire logistical system, the geography, the physics, the economy we just talked about, is ultimately powered by one single unifying principle, charity. It's this unbroken connection of love between beings that actually allows the actions of the living to reach across the veil of death. Finally, let's move to section 4, an interconnected spiritual cosmos and order in the invisible. In Aquinas' massive framework, absolutely nothing is left to chance. Every single soul has an exact place based on its merit. Every action in life has an exact proportional reaction in the afterlife. And the living and the dead don't just exist in isolation. They remain intimately connected through this highly logical, rational economy of grace. He literally took the great, terrifying, chaotic unknown of death and transformed it into a total masterpiece of order, a universe where absolutely everything has a defined purpose and a mechanical function. It is just a breathtaking intellectual achievement, whether you share his theology or not. And it really leaves us with a final, provocative thought. If 13th century thinkers could map the invisible afterlife with such stunning, systematic precision, what unseen systems of our own, in our minds, in our societies, in our universe, are we still trying to map today? What's the modern equivalent of our timeless drive to categorize the unknown? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.